بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خاتم الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh and Ramadan Mubarak. We'd like to begin by offering you our well wishes during this blessed month of Ramadan. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He grant you the strength to complete the month. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless you and to grant you the mercy and the forgiveness during this blessed month of Ramadan and make your days happy and give you good fortune during all of these days and hopefully grant you the blessing of the month or the night of power, which we know is Laylatul Qadr. My name is Abdullah. I'm one of the faculty members here at Zaytuna College, and today we have decided to begin the month of Ramadan with a lecture entitled Fasting for Self-Mastery. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, when He speaks of fasting, He addresses the believers first and foremost by saying in one particular verse, يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون. O you who believe, fasting has been prescribed for you as it was prescribed for those who came before you in order that you attain consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This verse begins by emphasizing the importance or the important fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordained fasting. Kutiba alaykum al-siyam. Allah says He has ordained or prescribed or written fasting upon the believers. The reason this particular presentation is entitled Fasting for Self-Mastery is that precisely because it is the tendency of many Muslims when we think about fasting that to focus only on the very fact that fasting is a religious obligation. And so we fast the month of Ramadan, we abandon food and drink and all other types of things. And then once the sun sets, we return to our normal activities. And it is as many of us simply only focus on the very fact that this is a religious obligation to be fulfilled, when in fact there are many other things to consider about the fast. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he tells us in a sound tradition, رَبَّ صَائِمٍ لَيْسَ لَهُ مِنْ صِيَامِهِ إِلَّا الْجُوعُ وَالْعَطَشُ. Many people fast and they receive nothing more than hunger and thirst. وَرُبَّ قَائِمٍ لَيْسَ لَهُ مِنْ قِيَامِهِ إِلَّا السَّهَرُ. And many people, they stand up in prayer at night and only receive a loss of sleep. He also said in a very famous hadith, مَنْ لَمْ يَدَعْ قَوْلَ الزُّورِ وَعَمَلَ بِهِ فَلَيْسَ لِلَّهِ حَاجَةٌ فِي أَنْ يَدَعَ طَعَامَهُ وَشَرَابَهُ. That whoever does not leave off indecent speech or speaking falsehood and acting indecently, then Allah has no need for that person to leave off his food and drink. Of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't need anything, but this itself is part of the power or the rhetorical or somewhat of a hyperbole was utilized in the hadith to emphasize the importance of the individual not focusing only on the fact that we're not supposed to eat or we're not supposed to drink and we're not supposed to engage in sexual activity during the daytime. Rather, it is emphasized that the very fact the fast has both a physical and a spiritual element to it. And so many Muslims have the tendency to focus on the very fact that we have this obligation to fulfill, when in fact that is not the only thing that we need to consider. That the month of Ramadan and the fast itself is aimed at us gaining or achieving what is called taqwa, as the verse says, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. And that in itself is a process. But also when we think about the fast, and in particular the fast of Ramadan, that we should learn from it that it itself can serve as a tool for us to overcome many other types of appetites, many other types of impulses. One of the lessons of the month of Ramadan is that if a person can leave off those things that the body needs, then you can abandon those things that the body does not need. Or even if you can leave off those things that the soul perhaps needs, then you can leave off the things that the soul does not need. And so, and that is to say that we all need food, we need drink, and at a certain age, sexual gratification is also something which becomes a need. And so during the day of Ramadan, these are things that are typically lawful. They are lawful to do and engage in, but during the fast, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes those things to be unlawful. And we successfully complete our days, and we overcome our urges to indulge in these different things. And so the lesson that we should learn is that if I can leave off these things, if I can gain mastery over the things that I need, then I should be able to gain mastery over the things that I don't need. I don't need to backbite. I don't need to lie. I don't need to express or exhibit my envy and my hatred, my resentment toward people. Those are things that I do not need. And so that is one of the fundamental lessons that I would say that come from the fast of the month of Ramadan. So we also are attempting to acquire what we would call virtue during this month. And there's a difference between an act and a virtue, or an act and a vice. That the actions that human beings carry out day after day, and especially on a regular basis, eventually turn into dispositions. And these dispositions are either what we call a virtue, and that is when an individual is inclined towards doing good even when they don't have the opportunity to do so, or the thing or the act would turn into what is called a vice. And that is to say that a person develops a vicious nature such that you actually want to commit wicked acts or do things that are wrong even though you don't have the opportunity to do so. So the month of Ramadan is a month where we try to become involved with both tahliyah and tahliyah. We try to rid ourselves of harmful impulses, and we also try to adorn ourselves or acquire good impulses. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Messenger alayhi salatu wasalam, they promise us that an individual actually can gain reward even when one does not fulfill or carry out a good act. And one hadith that says, as it's attributed to the Prophet ﷺ, niyatul mu'mini khayrun min amalihi. The intention of the believer is better than his work. That's because it can be that a person may wish or hope or, let's say, resolve that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for example, blessed me to have $1 million, then I would give half of that or all of it in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But it may happen, or let's say it never happens during my entire life that this does occur. But Yawm al-Qiyamah, on the day of resurrection, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will resurrect you as an individual who has given $1 million in his way. Because that's just the way the heart works. And so the fast of Ramadan is intended for us to become people of taqwa, and more important than that, as stated, to become people of virtue, inshallah. And one of the virtues that I think on the occasion of the passing of our dear elder and hero, Muhammad Ali, may Allah abound him with his infinite mercy and grant patience to his family, that the one particular virtue is a virtue of courage. Courage is an extremely important virtue. And when it comes to the idea of mastery, of self-mastery, then what we see in the example of the life of Muhammad Ali is that he was a person who mastered his fear. Because courage itself is the golden mean by which a person is able to master fear. Now, fear can have some very extreme reactions. And there are typically two extremes to fear in one's life. One particular extreme is what we call the extreme of cowardice, that a person will be overcome with fear so much so that one locks oneself away, one decides, whatever, do whatever you want to me, take whatever I have because I do not want to have any pain in my life. That is one extreme, and that is not considered to be virtuous. If anything, that is considered to be a vice. But another extreme reaction to fear is the extreme of the individual who actually convinces him or herself that I no longer have any fear, and I'm not afraid of anything, and so you know what, I'm going to go over there, and I'm going to show those people who I am and who we are. I'm going to, even though you may have not done the crime that I am going to now punish you for, but you look like the person who committed the crime, so I'm going to give it to you. And that itself is what we call foolhardiness or recklessness. So this type of person is a person who may decide, I'm going to drive my car into that synagogue or into that mosque, into that church to show them that America is the land of the free and the home of the brave. That is what an example of recklessness or foolhardiness is. But courage is the means for controlling and mastering fear. Rather, if a person does not have some level of fear, then fundamentally that in itself is not called courage. Because to have courage, it means for you to confront your fears, to confront your anxieties, to actually face them head on. This is why in one famous hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, it is said, أفضل الجهاد كلمة حق أمام إمام جائر or أمام سلطان جائر, that the most superior form of jihad is a word of truth in the face of a tyrannical ruler. That is because the person who is actually speaking the word of truth doesn't know. You don't know if you're going to live or die. And you don't have any defense for yourself in that situation. So the person has fear, but is courageous, or she is courageous, and says what needs to be said in spite of not knowing what may occur. So courage is one of those important virtues that we seek to gain mastery, or we seek to acquire so that we can master our fear. One of my favorite fictional characters is Master Yoda. We all know Star Wars, and Yoda has all of these very profound wisdoms, these aphorisms that he has at times that he says. And in one of the episodes of Star Wars, if I recall, there was a discussion about the young Skywalker. This was the one who eventually became Darth Vader, and Yoda had noticed that he was overwhelmed with fear. He had an excessive amount of fear in himself. And so Yoda, he says to him in the presence of his colleagues, his Jedi colleagues, he says, fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger, and anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering. And so this is what it means to gain mastery over one's fear. So Muhammad Ali, Allah yarhamu, that when he himself was faced with the decision to either rid himself of his title and not have the opportunity anymore to make millions of dollars, and also be threatened with imprisonment if he didn't go to the Vietnam War, he stood up and he spoke bravely and wisely. And he was not an aggressive person. He himself respected the laws of the land, and for this is one of the main reasons that so many people love him. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala place him in the company of the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam and all of the righteous in the hereafter. So fasting, its definition, or one definition of fasting, is الإمساك بنية عن شهوتي البطن وفرجي من طلوع الشمس إلى طلوع الشمس إلى غروبها. That is, for one to restrain with intention to do so from the appetites of the stomach and the genitals from the rise of dawn until the setting of the sun. Now, fasting hasn't always meant the same thing throughout human history, especially amongst the people of the Revelation. That we actually find examples of the previous peoples, because in this particular verse that I quoted early on today about fasting being ordained for you, Allah afterwards says, كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِن قَبْلِكُمْ, as it was ordained for those who came before you. So fasting was something of the religious or the people of the Revelation. But the fast of the Muslim is not exactly the same as the fast of those in the past. So for instance, in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he mentions the story of Maryam alayhi salam, and after she gives birth to Isa bin Maryam, this miraculous birth, that he says to her, وَإِمَّا تَرِيِنَّ مِنَ الْبَشَرِ أَحَدًا فَقُولِي إِنِّي نَذَرْتُ لِلرَّحْمَنِ صَوْمًا. That, and if you happen to see any mortal beings, then say to them that I have vowed a fast to my Lord. I have vowed a fast to the All-Merciful One. فَلَنْ أُكَلِّمَ الْيَوْمَ إِنْسِيًّا. So I will not speak to anyone today. Meaning that the fast that she was upholding was a fast from speaking, fast from talking. And so which means that the fast itself, if we look at its linguistic meaning of just simply abstaining from something to restrain oneself, then you can make a fast from so many different things. You can make a fast from chocolate. You can make a fast from going to the movies or whatever it may be, whatever your challenge may be. So when we talk about fasting as a basis for self-mastery, this is fundamentally what it means, that you find that thing that you struggle with. You find that thing, although it may be lawful, you may struggle with it. It may become an addiction. Anything that's addiction is not healthy, because it can rule you, and it can destroy you eventually. So it may be, your addiction may be, that you're looking too much at your digital device. You're checking your email too much. Whatever it may be, there's so many different things that a person may be struggling with. But the fast, and understand what the fasting is all about, hopefully will give us a way to see this in a different light. So it was revealed to us that fasting is prescribed for us, as it was prescribed for those that came before us. And the month of Ramadan has a number of different names. Among the names of the month of Ramadan is Shahr al-Sabr, the month of perseverance, or the month of patience, the month of endurance. There are a number of different ways that you can translate as-sabr. In the Quran, Allah says, وَاسْتَعِينُوا بِالصَّبْرِ وَالصَّلَاةِ, and seek assistance with sabr and prayer. And sabr, and some of the exegetes, and many of the exegetes actually, they say that sabr in the verse actually means fasting. So is it as if Allah said, seek aid or seek assistance through fasting and prayer? Seek assistance through fasting and prayer. And Imam al-Ghazali actually says about sabr, the concept of patience, he actually says that this particular quality, or this virtue of patience, actually is a specific human quality. Min khasatil adami. It is one of the specific human qualities, because the human being is a creature of a type of complex that we ourselves are fundamentally constructed from both angelic and animalistic or bestial characteristics. And when we look at the angels, for instance, that the angels are a creature which is not affected by appetite, that they're not ruled by appetite, rather they're ruled by intelectivity. On the other hand, the animals, or the lower animals than the human being, they are ruled by their appetites. Doesn't mean that they don't think and have any level of rationality, but rather they are ruled. It is what predominates among the animals. And the human being has both angelic and bestial qualities, that we are, as the Greeks would say, hayawan natiq, we are the rational animal or the articulate animal. So we have both animal nature and we have the angelic nature. And so our aim and our goal in this life is for us to gain mastery over the lower or the carnal self, that the higher self is to gain mastery over the lower self. And so, and patience being a special characteristic of the human being, that is to say that the human being is the only creature that actually tries to resist his urges or her urges, tries to gain mastery over one's appetites. The animals, the lower animals, they don't do so. The angels, they don't have to worry about it. So this is something to reflect upon as well. So the human being understanding one's nature is extremely important. We also need to understand that in this world, that this world has been characterized as a battleground, a ma'araka, a battleground between the forces of Satan and the forces of the angels, who of course are fighting for Allah and for good, subhanahu wa ta'ala. And while we're in this world, we need to understand what sort of weapons are being utilized against us. We need to understand our own nature, understand that the human being is a psychosomatic creature, that what we do with the flesh, it influences the spirit. And what we do to the spirit can ultimately transform the flesh as well, or what transform our actions. This is why we have the hadith about the heart, and that how if this part of the body is corrupt, then the whole body is corrupt, and if it is whole or healthy, then the whole body will be healthy, and that is both for physical and on the spiritual planes. So fasting for self-mastery, this is what we, inshallah, should be involved in. And so understanding our nature is extremely important. Understanding how we can be affected. And then I also want to bring us to, before I move a bit closer to closing this particular lecture, is to highlight that a hadith which is related on the authority of Mu'adh bin Jabal, radiallahu an, the famous student of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Mu'adh himself was one of the most knowledgeable of the Sahaba, and he, prior to the death of the Prophet ﷺ, was commissioned with going to be sent off to Yemen to go to the people and stand as judge over them and to teach them Islam. And the Prophet ﷺ, who walked with Mu'adh on this particular journey prior to setting off on the journey, and he told him, after bidding him farewell, that perhaps when you return, that you will just simply be returning to my masjid and my grave. Upon hearing this, Mu'adh, of course, he became very overwhelmed and started to cry. But Mu'adh has a very special place with the Prophet and in our tradition. And so Mu'adh is telling this story, and so he comes to the Prophet ﷺ, and he says, Ya Rasulullah, أخبرني بعمل يدخلني الجنة ويباعدني عن النار. So, O Rasulullah, O Messenger of God, tell me about a deed which will bring me or grant me entrance into the garden and will distance me from the fire. And before continuing, it is important to note that this was a major concern, not only in Mu'adh, but just the Sahaba in general. The Prophet ﷺ fundamentally came to teach us the ways to achieve Jannah in this life, that this world is a battlefield, but it's also a planting ground. Mazra'atul al-akhirah, ad-dunya mazra'atul al-akhirah. The world, it is a planting ground for the hereafter. And so the Prophet ﷺ shows the ways, and so his Sahaba had this concern. He wanted to know, is there one deed I can do that will bring me into Jannah and distance me from the fire? What would that deed be? And so one of the things that distinguishes us Muslims today, because oftentimes I think we forget this, is that so while in the process of trying to prove to people that we're just like them, we forget that there's certain things very distinct about Muslims. That Muslims, we believe in the unseen, we believe in the angels, we believe in heaven, we believe in hell. We believe in the evil eye. We believe the evil eye is real. We believe in black magic that actually does work. So we believe not only in physical causation, but we believe in metaphysical causation as well. And so just as for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction in the physical realm, the same thing could be said about the metaphysical realm or the spiritual realm for us. That is to say that when we do things, when we do or we don't do things, that these have an impact on our soul and on our ultimate salvation in the hereafter. And that is to say, another way to put this is to say that our deeds have the power to propel us in one direction or another. And what I like to do often is, when I think about heaven and hell, I imagine them as two planets. Like it's two planets, and I imagine myself, in between those two planets in outer space and orbit. And so when you understand that, okay, when I do a good deed, for each good deed that I do, that in itself adds some force and propulsion to me, and it propels me in the direction of Jannah. And when I do a bad deed, it propels me in the opposite direction. But the more I do of good, and this is, of course, when we're seeking to achieve virtue, the more I do of good, that eventually what happens is I get so close to Jannah that I get caught up in the gravitational pull of Jannah. And even if I want to pull myself out, I can't. And the same thing can be said about the hellfire, that some people, they get so close to it that they get caught up in the gravitational pull of hell until they can't pull themselves out, to the extent that even if people were to come to them and try to give them guidance, that they wouldn't heed the guidance. They wouldn't even understand what is coming to them. They wouldn't be able to appreciate this. Now, of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not damn people just simply after they were born here, you're just going to hell. Like that, that's it, and it doesn't give you a chance. As a matter of fact, Allah gives us chance after chance after chance after chance, and it's only when we turn away and our hearts turn away from the Creator that damnation occurs, to the point that you won't be able to see guidance if it comes to you. At any rate, we come back to the hadith of Mu'adh. So the hadith of Mu'adh, Ya Rasulullah, tell me about an action, a deed. If I do it, it will bring me into Jannah and it will distance me from the fire. And so the Prophet ﷺ responds to him, لَقَدْ سَأَلْتَ عَنْ عَظِيمٍ. You have asked about something serious. You have asked about something great, something magnificent, something serious. وَإِنَّهُ لَيَسِيرٌ عَلَى مَنْ يَسَرَهُ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ. And it is easy for anyone that Allah makes it easy for. And so he responds to him, تَعْبُدُ اللَّهَ وَلَا تُشْرِكُوا بِهِ شَيْئًا. You are to serve and worship God without associating partners with Him. وَتُقِيمَ الصَّلَاةِ. And establish the prayer. وَتُؤْتِ الزَّكَاةِ. And give the zakat, charity. وَتَصُومُ Ramadan. And you fast Ramadan. وَتُحُجِّ الْبَيْتِ. And you seek out the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this was his answer to Mu'adh's questions. That was Mu'adh's question. I just want to know, is there something I can do to get me away from the hellfire into Jannah? And so Prophet, this is his answer. But then the Prophet ﷺ, he turns him in a different direction. He then says to him, أَلَا أَدُلُّكَ عَلَى أَبْوَابِ الْخَيْرِ. Said, shall I not point you or direct you to the gateways to goodness? Of course, we know Mu'adh, he says, of course. Bala ya Rasulullah. Indeed, yes, I want to hear it. What are the gateways to goodness? And so what is meant by the gateways to goodness, in my opinion, are the particular types of exercises that one can do which will eventually instill virtue in an individual. That if these are regular practices of the person, that you become not only a person of good acts, but a person of virtue. That is a person who actually wants to do good even when you don't have the opportunity to do so. Or we say that these are the foundation of those virtues. So he said, the gateways to goodness. And the first thing he mentions is as-sawmu junnah. Fasting is a shield. First thing he mentions, fasting is a shield. وَالصَّدَقَةُ تُطْفِئُ الْخَطِيئَةَ كَمَا يُطْفِئُ الْمَاءُ النَّارِ. And charity, it extinguishes sin in the same way that water extinguishes fire. وَصَلَاةُ الرَّجُلِ فِي جَوْفِ اللَّيْلِ. And the prayer that a person performs during the middle of the night. So he gives these three things: fasting, charity, and prayer in the middle of the night. That is to say, prayer of tahajjud. And what we notice about these three things is that these are things that call us to a type of sacrifice. That the first, in fasting, what do we sacrifice? We sacrifice our appetites during the fast. That we sacrifice food, drink, sexual gratification, among other things. And if we're observing the spiritual fast, we abandon the other things that we typically are involved in. Too much talk, gossip, among other things. And then the second thing, charity, we're sacrificing wealth. And we know how attached the heart is to wealth and how much we love wealth. So we sacrifice wealth, a portion of our wealth, right, for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But this is different from zakat. So zakat, we know 2.5%. Sadaqah is what is freely done, what is done voluntarily, right? But we're sacrificing our attachment to something which won't go with us when we leave this world. And the third thing, Salatul Tahajjud, is a sacrifice of sleep. So Tahajjud, how is it prayed? You pray Isha, you go to sleep, and you wake up, and then you pray Salatul Tahajjud. So you're sacrificing sleep for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And one thing we're doing, another thing we're doing by sacrificing these things, in one sense, we are participating, or let's say, for lack of a better word, that we are emulating God in some of his specific characteristics. That is to say, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he doesn't eat, he doesn't sleep, he doesn't need any type of gratification from his creation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he doesn't need wealth. He's the owner of all wealth. Right? And because there's nothing for him to sacrifice, but we sacrifice it. But in Allah, he doesn't sleep. Al-Hayyu Qayyum, la ta'khudhuhu sinatun wa la nawm. So in sharing in these things, it brings us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it also reminds us of just how not like the Creator we are, right? There's some things, in some aspects, yes, we are, that Allah given us certain characteristics that that are reflections of his absolute characteristics of knowledge, life, among other things, but these things are reminders of that. And so these are the vehicles through which self-mastery, inshallah, they occur. Then we reflect deeply upon that. So at any rate, with that, I hope that the message is clear about how fasting itself can be utilized as a basis for self-mastery, not only with regard to the normal rituals that Muslims are responsible for undertaking, but also if simply as an archetype for us abandoning other types of addiction that we may have. Because the human being, if we understand our nature, returning back to this, the human being is not born with an appetite for a particular type of thing. Let's say, for instance, if we're talking about food and drink, that we're not born with an appetite for ice cream, right? We're born with an appetite to remove hunger or to remove thirst. That's what we're born with, And as we grow up, the same thing. But once we taste ice cream, when I get hungry, I don't want just anything. I need some ice cream in order to get rid of this hunger. Or I need some pizza, whatever it may be, that my thing may be. So we have to fast from certain things in order to gain mastery over our appetites. Because sometimes these things become harmful. Increased weight causes us high blood pressure, whatever it may be. That if we look at fasting from a linguistic standpoint, then it helps us to understand how itself can be utilized as a tool for self-mastery, inshallah. So with that, we're going to actually give anybody who may be watching an opportunity to ask any questions that you may have. In the meantime, I would also ask those of you who are with us and can stick around for a few minutes to look at your page and look at that blue button that says donate. Please donate to Zaytuna College during the month of Ramadan, support our efforts, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant you success, grant you well-being, both spiritually and physically and financially, inshallah. So if there are any questions, then we will give you an opportunity to ask any questions. And if there are not any questions, that's just as good, inshallah. But I'll leave it to my brother Harun Sellers right now to let us know if anyone is available to ask any questions, inshallah. Tafaddal. Now,
Barakallah feek, appreciate that.
Yeah.
We're going to take a question we have in the feed at this time. Jazakallah khair. Our son is traveling to your Arabic intensive from the East Coast.
MashaAllah.
He will be fasting here and in the fast there with a 3-hour time difference. The fast would be about 20 hours. Does he have to fast as a traveler? Does he have to leave before Fajr in order not to fast? Does he have to travel the minimum distance or just set out to be a traveler? Jazakallah khair.
Yeah. The mainstream schools and opinions in the mainstream schools of Islam are that if a person wants to take the license to not fast as a traveler, that one needs to depart prior to Fajr. There does exist an opinion in the Hanbali school that actually allows for a person, as long as they have the intention, they wake up with the intention to fast, uh, and to try. I mean, to break up with the intention to not fast because of the plan to travel, then that person, even if they leave after Fajr, would be able to shorten their prayer, or just simply, because we're not talking about prayer here, we're talking about fasting. I'm sorry, but they can take the benefit of actually not fasting, inshallah. So if you are okay with that opinion, then it would be valid for him if there's no other way for him to leave prior to Fajr. And hopefully Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will accept the fast. If he chooses to fast, because that's the other option as well, if he wants to just simply see how much he can endure and just simply fast. Right now, I think we're fasting 16 hours during the daytime, so an extra 4, it may not necessarily hurt him, unless, of course, it may be in bad health. But it is a thing that I leave to the person to make the choice about. These are the opinions that exist, and then you do what's called istafti qalbak. You take a fatwa from your heart, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept the whatever position that you take. Now.
Thank you. What are some tips or words of advice of encouragement for a new Muslim who will be fasting for the first time and feels a bit nervous?
Advice for a new Muslim fasting for the first time is to, one, be sure that you hydrate as much as possible during the nights, that you try your best to do things that will help to make the time go by faster. And that does not include overexertion, so I don't want you to exert yourself, and this is another thing you want to avoid. Hydrate yourself, but at the same time, try not to be involved with any type of activities such as sports or among other things, unless that's your job, and that's a different story altogether. So for instance, you're a professional athlete, but hydrate, eat, I would say eat, try not to overeat, and that's the tendency of a lot of Muslims, especially in the Muslim world. There's a tendency to overeat after you break your fast, and I think that you should actually lose weight during Ramadan as opposed to gain. Some people, unfortunately, gain weight during the month of Ramadan because of trying to make up for the calories that they didn't have during the day. You break your fast, you eat your full, you try to get up for the morning meal prior to Fajr, eat a light meal, maybe toast, some yogurt, some dates, water, something, or eggs, whatever it may be, in order to prepare you for your day. Read the Quran as much as you can on each day. Ideally, perhaps a 30th of the Quran, or if not, however much you're able to do so. Pray your sunnahs. There are a lot of different things I can tell you to do, but the main thing is to pace yourself. That's the main thing, is to pace yourself and try not to place too much of a burden on yourself. If you feel that that you may pass out, or it's just too much of a struggle, then you're allowed to actually to break your fast in a situation when it's extremely difficult for you to do so. Like if you, for instance, feel like you're nauseous, things among other things. Of course, you might choose not to break your fast, but that's all up to you. But it's important just to understand that Allah is merciful. If you are sick or something like that, and you're feeling that you can't keep up, then you're allowed to break your fast. But try your best to fulfill the fast and do it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And give charity. That's another thing too. Try to perhaps every day give something a little bit, $1 here or there to someone. And those are ways that you can hopefully successfully complete the fast. And I think that's advice not only for you, but probably for any Muslim who's out there, inshallah.
Great. Actually, I think you just answered this question, but just maybe to summarize, one comes from Twitter. Is it okay to break my fast for travel if it's really not a hardship?
Well, I mean, the license or permission to break one's fast or to not fast due to travel is not based upon the idea of hardship. And it's the same thing with shortening the prayer, that some people misunderstand this, that even outside of fasting, that when a person is allowed to shorten one's prayer for travel, it's not because there's hardship. It's because it's travel, period. That travel is the reason why you can shorten your prayer, or sometimes you can combine your prayers depending on the school you're dealing with. But if you leave in the right time, at the right time of day, which is ideally prior to Fajr, then you don't have to fast. You can fast. Some schools, they encourage you to fast anyway, but you don't have to fast. And you have the license, you just simply have to make up the days at a later date, inshallah.
Thank you for that. Jazakallah khair.
Yeah.
How much time do you have to make up days if you missed fasting due to a woman's monthly cycle?
The normal time that is allotted for a person, be they a woman because of her menstrual cycle, because of pregnancy, among other things, or a man because of sickness, the usual time, typical time that you're allowed to make up your fast is prior to the next Ramadan. Right, so you have all the way until the next Ramadan to make up your fast, the days that you miss. If you don't, or you're unable to make up the days you miss for some particular reason, then naturally to make them up whenever after that, before the subsequent Ramadan. It's because sometimes I know that what happens is a woman may get pregnant, and because of pregnancy she can't fast, and then once she has a baby, then because of she's breastfeeding the child, then that in itself is another justification for not fasting. So she has justification not to fast, and so the Islamic law doesn't rule as harshly against someone like that as it would against, say, for instance, a man who perhaps was ill and didn't fast and then got better prior to the month of Ramadan, that the person should try to make up before the month of Ramadan. And if you don't make up the days by the next Ramadan due to negligence, then the scholars say that you have to pay an additional charity offering to basically feed one person per day for each day that you did not make up if you negligently did not make up the days prior to the subsequent Ramadan.
Jazakallah khair.
Well, yeah.
I think this may be the last question, but we'll see.
Inshallah.
I really like the title of this lecture regarding self-mastery through fasting. However, I always feel conflicted during Ramadan between sentiments or an inclination towards reclusive or antisocial behavior so that I can focus on myself and my self-mastery, and also the rewards that we know of providing food for fasting people, which takes the form of iftars and things like that. But iftars can become or can feel like a big social event. And then my Ramadan seems to become a series of calendar plots of social events as opposed to plotting the different things within myself that need attention and mastery. Could you provide some advice on how to balance between giving attention to the self and giving attention to others and the reward therein?
Right. On one level, it sounds like you may have to include in your intention to fast, or I guess you would say one of your Ramadan resolutions. It's supposed to be Ramadan revolution and resolution, right? That you want to include in it is to fast from people, at least for a certain amount of time. Now, being social is a good thing, but oftentimes too much socialization can be very detrimental to the soul and to our spiritual practice and spiritual state. Because you're together with people, and you may be good at restraining your tongue, but you're in the company of other people who are not, and so you become a participant sometimes in those type of things. So you have to be very careful about that. If you are able to keep up with your, I would say, your voluntary prayers, you make all your voluntary prayers, your reading of every day, you lessen the amount of talk that you're involved in, and you pray Taraweeh every night. I think it would be very difficult for anybody to actually find time to find a lot of time to really socialize personally, especially with Isha coming in so late these days. So if you've been working during the daytime, you've been fasting as well. You come home, you break your fast with family, you pray Maghrib, I guess lie down for a minute, then Isha being another half an hour or something like that, you go to the masjid, you pray Taraweeh, and you head back home. I'm quite sure that most of us would be too sleepy to really be involved with socialization, But if it's like something every day, if you're not praying Taraweeh, then I think that itself would actually be one of the things that's hindering you from doing additional types of worship. So perhaps it has something to do with just how you want to schedule your day. And we want to be sociable people, but at the same time, I don't think that we can blame anybody for fearing the hellfire, right? By, just say, I'm going to withdraw from people because I don't trust myself, right? And typically that's what we have to do. We have to withdraw sometimes. There's a concept of uzla, or even the concept of khalwa, of just being in isolation and in seclusion as well from people. And that's why we find even in the month of Ramadan, the end of Ramadan, we have i'tikaf. And that's actually part of included amongst the verses related to fast, which are there. And i'tikaf is very, very powerful and very difficult spiritual exercise if you do it for a number of days, of course. But you might want to try that as well during the month towards the end of Ramadan, even if it's half of the night. If you did from Maghrib to Fajr or something like that, you might start at your house and perhaps maybe try it in the masjid. There are a number of different ways. I just think that you could balance your time and keep yourself from wasting too much time, and actually get full benefit from the month, inshallah. So hopefully that is helpful. If not, then you can follow up as well.
Barakallah feek. I believe that's it.
That's it?
Yes, sir.
Billahi shahida. MashaAllah. So again, I'd like to wish everyone a very happy and blessed Ramadan. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant you well-being, grant you good fortune, grant you health and wealth, and increase in your iman and sincerity. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from harm. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make our hearts turn in His direction and long to meet Him and to meet His Messenger alayhi salatu wassalam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.